Welcome to Talking Point from the Church's Fellowship for Psychical and Spiritual Studies.
The Alethiometer, the I Ching, a negative capability. Reverend Michael Paternoster. This article appeared in the March 2009 edition of the Christian Parapsychologist Journal, and may reflect the language and attitudes of the time in which it was written. Responsibility for opinions expressed herein rests solely with the author, and such opinions must not be taken to represent those of the CFPSS. The film The Golden Compass was based on the first part of Philip Pullman's trilogy, His Dark Materials, and took its name from the Alethiometer, a device which is central to the plot and which looks a bit like a compass. This device will answer truthfully any question put to it, if you know how to interpret it. In a parallel universe, which mirrors our own but with significant differences, the Alethiometer is entrusted to the heroine, Lyra, but she has to find out for herself how to read it. Round the dial are 36 symbols. There are 3 adjustable pointers which can be set to any of the symbols the operator chooses, and a 4th, longer, pointer that is not under the operator's control. To ask a question, one selects the 3 symbols that most nearly express one's meaning and watches the long pointer, which will swing purposefully, pointing to one or more of the symbols in succession. All the adults in the story assume that the answer can only be elucidated after long and patient study of all the possible meanings attached to each symbol, but Lyra proves to have a natural talent for arriving at the intended meaning almost immediately. Having set the hands to point at her chosen symbols, she holds the Alethiometer in the palms of her hands and gazes at it, stilling her mind and keeping it open to whatever comes. Each symbol has many layers of meaning, but with practice she finds that the right level comes into focus and enables her to see the answer to the question she had in mind. For instance, wanting to know what had happened to a spy her allies had sent out, she put together the serpent and the crucible and the beehive, and the 4th arm pointed at the skull, because I thought the serpent was cunning, like a spy ought to be, and the crucible could mean like knowledge, what you kind of distill, and the beehive was hard work, like the bees are always working hard. So out of the hard work and the cunning comes the knowledge, see, and that's the spy's job, and I pointed to them and I thought the question in my mind, and the needle stopped at death. Sure enough, news comes almost at once that the spy has been captured and killed. Sadly, as she grows up, Lyra loses this intuitive gift. If as an adult she is ever again to master the art of reading the Alethiometer, it will only be by patient and persevering study of the ancient texts which explain the many possible meanings of the symbols. The Alethiometer has, of course, no real existence outside the story, but there is in our own world at least one method of divination that can apparently be used to clarify and answer questions and help in decision-making, and to this we are introduced in the second part of the trilogy. It is the I Ching. Lyra has now found her way from her world into ours, where she meets Mary Malone, a physicist doing research into fundamental particles who has pinned to the back of her laboratory door a chart of the hexagrams of the I Ching. Mary pretends to herself that it is only there because it is an attractive and decorative pattern, and as a hard-headed materialist who has given up religion, she was once a nun, she does not really believe in such things. Nonetheless, when she is forced to leave at very short notice, among the few personal possessions she takes with her is a battered copy of a commentary on the I Ching, for 2 reasons: 1, that it was a present from her grandfather 20 years ago, the other that her meeting with Lyra and the traumatic experiences that followed have convinced her that there are intelligences out there which have many ways of communicating with us, and as this way was one with which she had experimented as a teenager, she knew how to set about it. In fact, almost the first thing she does, lost and alone in an alien world, is to consult the I Ching. The answer is enigmatic but vaguely reassuring. Granted that the Alethiometer has no existence outside the book, the I Ching, or Book of Changes, certainly does exist, and is by many, including Jung, taken very seriously. It is one of the oldest forms of divination still practiced, a tried and tested method of great subtlety. There are 64 hexagrams, each consisting of 6 lines, some unbroken, some broken. To seek its advice, one of the possible hexagrams is built up, line by line from the bottom up by casting a set of yarrow stalks or small coins and adding up their numerical value. This has to be done ritually and with calm and concentrated attention. As Tom Reisman says, in his introduction to the I Ching, the Book of Changes, questioning and interpreting the oracle requires both precision and an open mind. Often this means suspending disbelief as far as possible to allow the subtle and frequently confusing images to penetrate the mind. No psychic talents are necessary, but one's attitude is of fundamental importance. If the oracle is treated like a party game, it will give party game answers. The first step is to be respectful, which is why a ritual formality can be helpful. When one has built up a complete hexagram, it is then necessary to consult the Book of Changes, a difficult and obscure text out of which one can surprisingly often elicit a meaning relevant to the question in one's mind. When initially Lyra and Mary are discussing the various ways in which one can seek and find answers to questions, Mary produces a scrap of paper on which she has written a quotation from Keats. One has to be in a state of mind capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. This Keats called negative capability, and for him it was a necessary precondition of poetic inspiration. Of any system of divination, we are entitled to ask 3 questions. Does it work? If so, how does it work? Should Christians practice it at all? To the first question, does it work? I am tempted to answer, after the manner of Professor Joad of the Brains Trust, it depends what you mean by work. If the I Ching is regarded as a surefire infallible guide able to tell you anything you want to know, it doesn't work. It will not tell you who will win the Grand National or the next election. Despite that, more often than can be accounted for by chance, people have found that something emerges which makes clearer to them what they can expect to happen, or what they ought to do. There is, it seems to me, a parallel with dowsing. There are those who, because they cannot understand how it works, insist that it cannot work and dismiss any successes as pure coincidence. There are some people who are skilled dowsers and produce results nearly every time, certainly far more often than can be explained by chance. And most of us can sometimes strike lucky. I would have said that I had no talent for dowsing, but my own conviction that it works, though don't ask me how it works, stems from a time when friends bought a derelict Highland croft and desperately needed to find a source of water on their land. We all tried with dowsing rods made out of metal coat hangers, and I know beyond a shadow of doubt that the rods moved in my hands without my volition, and that the spot where this happened was where we found an underground spring. I have to say that my own experiments with the I Ching have been inconclusive. I think that I have grasped the underlying philosophy, which is that in this world the one constant is change. Yin and yang are not eternally opposed principles like good and evil, but like light and dark, day and night, they merge into each other. The unbroken lines of the hexagram represent yang, the broken lines yin. As the hexagram is built up, you can tell the direction of change, and can therefore judge whether this is a propitious moment for whatever you intend to do. However, the difficulty for me lies in the fact that I have to rely on an English translation of archaic Chinese texts whose meaning is far from clear. The structure of the Chinese language is so different from ours that translation is an exceptionally fallible process. For instance, of that other ancient Chinese classic, the Tao Te Ching, I have read 3 different versions and they are so very different that I cannot be at all sure of the true meaning of the text. Having said that, one has to remember how many people use and value the Bible as a guide to life without knowing a word of Hebrew or Greek. Despite all the obscurities and the possible mistranslations, something obviously gets through. Reading the symbols is an art. As with dream imagery, they need to be interpreted. Most conventional signs, such as those on maps and road signs, are arbitrarily chosen but have a single clear meaning, a one-to-one correspondence between the symbol and the thing symbolized. By contrast, the imagery of the human psyche that surfaces and dreams and the various systems of divination is archetypal and universal, but carries with it a whole penumbra of meaning and association. Its meaning in any particular context is not obvious, but has to be sought by patient study or by intuition. Granted, then, that at least sometimes and for some people, the I Ching works, that it really does what is claimed for it, the next question is how it works. Whether or not it works seems to depend on the attitude you bring to it. You have to approach in the frame of mind Keats called negative capability, or it will say nothing to you. This is not just a willing suspension of disbelief, it is an attitude of respectful openness, of being alertly passive. What happens then can be explained in one of two ways. The first is that you are given genuine information from some source outside yourself, though what you suppose that source to be depends largely on your cultural and religious conditioning. Put in the most neutral terms, there is an intelligence out there, willing to get through to you if you put yourself in a sufficiently receptive state. The alternative explanation is that if you formulate the question clearly enough and then let your mind relax, you will find that you already know the answer. The I Ching is one of a number of tools to help you bring into consciousness what you know without knowing you know. As far as I can see, there is no objective test that will decide between these two explanations. Which of them you think more likely will depend on the presuppositions you have formed on the basis of other beliefs and experiences. If, for instance, you have grounds for supposing that prayer is not just self-help but a genuine dialogue, you will be more ready to accept the possibility of receiving information and instruction that does not simply well up from your own unconscious mind. As to the third question, there are, of course, Christians who will condemn any procedure that they regard as dabbling in the occult. Provided, however, that one does not come so to rely on the I Ching, or anything of the kind, that it becomes an idol, I see no danger in consulting it if one finds it helpful. Not everyone does. Some people have a gift for reading the signs, just as some people have second sight, and should be encouraged to use it responsibly and with discretion. True, it can be used as a substitute for taking personal responsibility for one's decisions, but then so can the Bible if it is treated as an infallible oracle in its own right, and not as a means through which God can speak to us. As I have pondered these questions, it occurs to me that consulting the Alethiometer or the I Ching has analogies with prayer. You will recall that the child Lyra can grasp intuitively what the Alethiometer is saying to her, whereas most adults have to go through a laborious process to arrive at the significance that its archetypal symbols have in a particular context. I suspect that the same may be true of the I Ching. Most of us have to struggle with the commentaries to get at the meaning, but there may be some who have reached a stage where they grasp the pattern at once. Is there perhaps a parallel here to the two kinds of prayer traditionally termed meditation and contemplation? There are, in books like Bede Frost's The Art of Mental Prayer, any number of elaborate patterns of meditation that take one from a text of scripture through several stages to a final resolution. In contemplation, or prayer of the heart, those who are adept can bypass all that and go straight into a state of openness to the divine. Both ways demand that state of mind, which I have described as alertly passive, which is close to, but not quite identical with, what Keats appears to have meant by negative capability. Probably most of us will have to persevere indefinitely with what the old ordination service calls diligence, in reading of the Holy Scriptures and in such studies as help to the knowledge of the same, only occasionally experiencing those flashes of insight that we cannot deliberately seek but can only accept with gratitude when they come. Christians do not doubt that there is someone out there who wants to communicate with us. As C.S. Lewis once said, God is very unscrupulous, so if there is anyone for whom the I Ching is a door by which he can enter, he will certainly take advantage of it.
You have been listening to Talking Point from the Church's Fellowship for Psychical and Spiritual Studies. To find out more, please visit www.churchesfellowship.co.uk.